Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled across the scrubland as the stagecoach wheels bucked against the rutted trail, and Willa Prescott coughed into her handkerchief, praying no one noticed the blood. They always noticed. 3 days ago, the man she had crossed half the country to marry took one look at her pale skin and thin frame and said, "You didn't say you were sickly." He had not helped her down from the coach. He had not carried her trunk. He had walked away, leaving her standing in the dirt outside the Cheyenne post office like a forgotten parcel. Willa's chest ached from more than the illness. She had sold everything, answered his letter with hope in her heart, and now she had nothing. No home, no husband, no place to go. The station master let her sleep in the freight room for a night, but this morning, he had gently told her she had to move on. She had nowhere to move on to. She sat on the edge of a wooden bench outside the depot, her trunk beside her, her fingers trembling as she clutched the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Every breath hurt. Every moment out here in the cold wind stole a little more strength from her. She blinked hard, trying not to cry. A horse's hooves slowed near her, and a deep, cautious voice said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Willa looked up. The man on the chestnut gelding had eyes the color of prairie storm's gray with hints of blue and a face weathered by sun and wind. He looked to be around 30, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a rifle strapped in a scabbard beside the saddle. Willa tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I am just resting." "You do not look just resting," he said, dismounting in one smooth motion. He wore a tan coat patched at the elbow, and his boots were scuffed with red dust. A cowboy through and through. "Name's Zeke Fallon. I was picking up supplies. Saw you sitting here yesterday, too." She tried to straighten. "I am Willa Prescott. I came here to be married." Zeke glanced at the trunk, then back at her pale face. "And?" She did not answer. She looked away, ashamed. Zeke exhaled slowly. "You got anywhere to go?" "No," she whispered, "but I will figure something out." "I got a small place out east of town," he said. "Not much. Cabin, couple head of cattle, some chickens. I could give you a place to stay, just until you find your feet." Willa stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He hesitated, and for a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. "Because you are out here alone, and that is not right." Willa's throat closed. She wanted to say no. She wanted to pretend she could make it on her own, but she was too tired to lie. "Yes," she said. "Please." Zeke nodded once, then hoisted her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Come on. We will take it slow." She could barely stay upright in the saddle, but he rode close, one arm steadying her as they left town. The land stretched wide in every direction, yellow grass, low hills, the scent of sage in the air. Willa leaned into his side as the fever made her sway. By the time they reached his cabin, her lips were blue. Zeke carried her inside and laid her on a cot near the stove. He stoked the fire high, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and brought water warm with honey to her lips. She blinked up at him, dazed. "You do not even know me." "I do not need to," he said. "You need help. That is enough." She passed out before she could answer. The next few days blurred. Willa drifted in and out, her lungs on fire, her hands trembling. Zeke fed her spoonfuls of broth when she could eat, washed her face with cool cloths, and sat beside her in the evenings, reading from a tattered Bible by lamplight. He never touched her without asking, never looked at her with pity, only quiet care. One night, Willa woke to find him dozing in the chair beside her, his hat tilted forward, his long legs stretched out. The firelight flickered across his face, and something warm stirred in her chest. She reached out, touched his hand. He woke instantly, eyes alert, then softened when he saw her. "Hey," he said low. You are burning up less. Zeke, she whispered. Why? Why are you still here? He looked down at their joined hands. Because you are. By the end of the week, Willa could sit up. Her color came back slowly. She managed to eat bread and cheese, then stew. She moved to the rocker by the window and watched him work. Zeke fixed a broken fence post, milked the cow, brought in wood. He moved quiet, steady, without waste. He noticed things. When her shawl slipped, he pulled it back over her shoulders. When her tea cooled, he warmed it again. He never said much, but when he looked at her, she felt like she mattered. One evening, she helped him slice potatoes for dinner. Her hand trembled on the knife, and he reached over, steadying it with his. You do not have to, he said. I want to, she said, meeting his eyes. He did not look away. You are stronger than you think, Willa. She smiled for the first time in weeks. I think you are the only one who believes that. I reckon I always have. She asked him one morning, as they sat on the porch drinking coffee. Why are you alone, Zeke? He stared out at the land. Folks gone. My brother died in the war. Parents passed after. I tried town life once. Did not take. I got tired of being asked if I was ever going to settle down. Willa looked down at her hands. And now you have a sickly stranger in your house. You are not a stranger. She looked up. You are Willa, he said. And you are not sickly. You are tired. That is different. Her throat tightened. I came here to marry a man who wanted a strong wife with red cheeks and a big dowry, she said. He saw me and turned away. I am not him, Zeke said. His voice was low, steady. And I do not want red cheeks or a dowry. I want someone honest, brave, someone who keeps going, even when she can barely breathe. Willa's eyes filled. I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything. He reached over, took her hand, held it warm in his calloused one. They sat like that until the sun sank low across the plains, and the wind calmed to a hush. The first morning Willa stepped outside. The air caught sharp in her lungs. She leaned lightly on the doorframe, while shawl wrapped snug, and watched Zeke in the distance. His coat tugged tight against the wind as he led 2 milk cows down toward the creek. Her legs were still unsure beneath her, but she stood, steady enough to feel the sun on her face. She hadn't asked for much those first days, hadn't dared. But she wanted to help, to earn her place with more than gratitude. So she brought in water with the tin pail, set it by the stove, and swept the floor in slow strokes, careful not to stir up dust that would start her coughing again. When Zeke came back in at midday, he paused at the door, his gaze roaming the room. You been up long? He asked, taking off his gloves and setting them on the table. Long enough to chase the dirt out, she said, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I thought maybe it'd be nice to do something useful. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, watching her a long moment. You don't owe me work, Willa. I know, she said. But I need to feel like I still belong to the living. Zeke nodded once, slow and sure, then poured her a cup of water and handed it over. Then we'll take it one piece at a time. They shared lunch, quietly, salt pork fried with onions, and cornbread crisp at the edges. She ate all of it, surprising herself. He didn't say a word about her empty plate, but he slid the last corner of his own bread toward her without comment. That afternoon, the wind dropped low, and she ventured farther just to the edge of the corral. A rabbit darted under the fence post. She smiled, breathless from the walk but lighter somehow. Zeke was chopping wood near the shed. Sleeves rolled past his elbows, rhythm steady. She watched the way he worked, like everything had its place, its reason. When he noticed her, he didn't stop, just said, You're braver than most folks I've known. She stepped closer, boots crunching over frost-brittle grass. Why's that? You keep showing up, he said, splitting another log clean through. Even when it's hard. Folks talk about grit, but most don't know what it means. Willa folded her arms, cheeks coloring. I wasn't brave when I left home. I was desperate. He paused long enough to meet her eyes. Sometimes those re the same thing. That night, she found a shirt of his folded on the chair by the fire, soft from wear, sleeves patched. She ran her fingers over the stitching. He'd sewn the repairs himself. She could tell by the uneven thread. In the days that followed, she began cutting fabric scraps from an old feed sack, fitting pieces together at the table. Zeke came in one evening and saw the quilt square spreading across her lap. "You're making something?" he asked, setting a coil of rope by the door. "Trying to," she said. "I used to sew with my mother. Thought maybe your cot could use something warmer come winter." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I never thought to ask for that." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I want to." The fire crackled, casting shadows across the walls. He reached for the kettle, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and handed her one. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't press too hard. "I used to think if I kept to myself, I wouldn't lose anything else," he said finally. Willa looked up from her stitching. "And now?" He didn't answer right away. "Now, I think maybe not everything worth having has to come with pain." She held his gaze, the quiet between them stretching warm and unhurried. Early the next morning, she woke to the sound of rain tapping on the roof. Zeke was already at the stove frying cornmeal mush. The room smelled of bacon grease and wood smoke. He glanced over his shoulder. "Storm rolled in fast," he said. "Won't be much to do today, except wait it out." Willa pulled the shawl tighter and walked to the window. The sky was a slate gray, and water ran in thin lines down the glass. "I don't mind," she said. "There's comfort in a day that asks nothing of you." He slid a bowl across the table. "Then we'll let it be just that." They ate without hurry, the rain steady outside. Afterward, she picked up her quilt square again, and Zeke took to oiling his tools. The room felt full, not crowded, just gently shared. By afternoon, the storm passed, and a soft hush settled over the land. Willa watched the last of the clouds drift east and turned to him. "Zeke." He glanced up from the whetstone in his hands. "Do you ever think about starting again?" she asked. "Not just surviving, but really building something?" He set the knife aside. "I think about it more lately." She folded her hands in her lap. "I want to be part of something that grows." He stood, walked to the window, then turned back toward her. "You already are, Willa." And in that moment she believed him. The ground thawed slow that spring, reluctant and stubborn. Snow still clung in the shaded hollows beneath the cottonwoods, but the wind carried a different note now, less bite, more breath. Willa folded her coat over her arms and stepped down from the porch, boots sinking into the softened earth. Zeke was by the barn, repairing the gate latch with a quiet focus that had become familiar to her. He'd taken to looking at her a little longer each day, not with concern, but with something steadier, like he was learning her piece by piece and finding no part lacking. She crossed to him, careful of the mud. "You said you had a mule once," she said, brushing her hair from her eyes as the wind played at it. "Old thing named Jasper," he said, tightening the bolt with a rusted wrench. "Mean as a drunk preacher and twice as stubborn. Died chasing a rattler off the feed shed. Still don't know if he meant to or just got ornery." Willa laughed, sharp and surprising in her own ears. "Sounds like the kind of animal a man like you would end up with." Zeke straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What kind is that?" "The quiet kind who acts like he doesn't care, but always feeds the dog first." He looked at her then, long and level. "You've been watching me." "I have eyes," she said, chin lifting. And I've been here long enough to see past your silences. Zeke leaned back against the fence post. What else have you seen? She hesitated, then stepped closer. You listen more than you speak. You fix things without waiting to be asked. And you're lonely, though you'd never admit it. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. This came yesterday, from the town dock. Willa took it, fingers brushing his. The paper was creased and worn at the corners. She read the words slowly, lips parting in surprise. He says I'm mending clear. That the fever's gone and my lungs sound strong. Zeke nodded once. He said you'll need to keep warm and eat well. But there's no reason you won't live a full life. She pressed the paper to her chest. I didn't think I'd ever hear that again. Zeke looked down at the ground, then back at her. You've got choices now, Willa. You're not bound to this place or to me. If you want to go east or find work in town, I'll get you there. She stared at him, heart pounding. You think I'd leave? I think you might want a life that doesn't smell like horses and smoke, he said quietly. I want a life where I'm seen, she said. And I've only ever had that here. Zeke's jaw shifted, like he was holding back something heavy. I don't know what I can offer. I've got land, but not much money. I've got work, but not a name that means anything. But if you want to stay, I'd sure be proud to build something with you. Willa stepped forward, closing the space between them. I didn't come all this way to find safety. I came to find home, and I think maybe I already have. He reached out then, slow and careful, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers paused there, warm against her skin. I won't let you down, he said. You haven't yet. They stood like that, with the wind soft between them and the scent of damp earth rising around their boots. The barn door creaked behind them, and somewhere a chicken clucked indignantly, but neither moved. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of peach and copper, Willa knelt by the hearth, stirring a pot of beans. Zeke came in, shoulders dusted with hay. He set a coil of twine on the shelf and came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. I've got an idea, he said. She looked up. Do I want to hear it? He crouched beside her. We've got a bit of timber left from the fence. I could frame a second room off the back. Give you space for your sewing. Or just quiet, when you want it. Her lips parted. You'd do that. I want this place to feel like yours, too. She set the wooden spoon aside and reached for his hand. It already does. But I'd like that room. He smiled, not wide, just enough to warm his eyes. And when the fire burned low and the sky turned to stars, they sat side by side in the quiet. No words spoken, no need for them. Just two people who'd made it through the long winter, ready now to begin something that was only theirs. By late April, the river had swollen past its winter banks. Cottonwood buds unfurled along the creeks, and Willa began waking early, drawn by the promise of warmth that lasted longer each day. She pulled on her boots before first light, tied her hair back with a scrap of muslin, and stepped out into the hush before the birds began calling. Zeke had already saddled the brown mare by the fence. He was fitting his bedroll tighter to the back of his saddle when she approached. You going far? She asked, adjusting the collar of her dress against the morning chill. Up past the ridge, he said, checking the cinch. Couple of strays been edging toward the river. I'll need to bring 'em in before they get too bold. She studied the line of his shoulders. You want company? He hesitated, brushing loose straw from his coat sleeve. You up for a ride that long? I didn't say I'd ride, she said. But I could walk with you to the hilltop. I'd like to see it. He offered his hand without another word. She took it and they set off side by side, boots soft in the damp grass. The climb was slow, with Willa pausing twice to catch her breath. But Zeke didn't press her. He slowed when she did, as if the pace didn't matter. When they reached the crest, the land opened wide before them. Rolling grassland touched gold by the sun, the river flashing in the distance like a ribbon of glass. Willa leaned against a boulder, heart steadying. "I never knew it looked like this from up here," she said. Zeke pulled his hat low against the sun. "First time I saw it, I stood here half the day. Thought maybe it was the first thing I'd seen since the war that wasn't broken." She turned to him. "You never told me you fought." He nodded once. "Enlisted out of Missouri. I was 18. Came back different. Couldn't make sense of town life after." She tucked her hands beneath her arms. "Did you lose someone close?" "My brother, Isaac. Shot clean through outside Franklin. He was younger than me. Didn't make it to 19. She looked out at the river, eyes stinging. "I'm sorry." He was the kind that smiled at everybody. Always made folks feel like they mattered. Willa stepped closer. "I think maybe you do that too, in your own way." He met her gaze, and the silence between them shifted, not heavy, but weighty with things understood. They made their way down the slope slowly. At the bottom, he mounted up and turned the mare toward the east fence line. "You'll be all right heading back?" he asked. "I'll follow the fence," she said. "And I'll start soaking beans for supper." He tipped his hat. "I'll be back before dark." She watched him ride off, the mare's hooves muffled in the wet grass, and she felt the kind of ache that wasn't pain, but something deeper, longing, maybe, or the shape of something being made whole again. Back at the cabin, she swept the porch, then brought water in from the barrel. She'd started keeping a small ledger by the fire, notes about what they had, what they needed to trade for, what seeds might take best in the back corner of the plot. She didn't ask Zeke before starting it. She just did, and he hadn't questioned it. He'd only added his own careful handwriting beside hers, noting the calves' birth dates and the weather the day the creek nearly flooded. That evening, he returned with a limp in his right leg and dried blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, running to meet him. "Stepped in a gopher hole," he grunted. "Horse spooked and threw me sideways. Took a branch to the arm." She helped him inside, peeled his coat off gently. The cut wasn't deep, but it had crusted dark and needed cleaning. "You should have come straight back when it happened," she said, wiping the wound with warm water. "Would've, if the steer hadn't gotten himself trapped in a gully." She tied a strip of linen around his arm. "You'll need to keep that clean. Don't want it festering." He flexed his fingers once, then winced. "You're bouger than you used to be." "I have more reason now." He looked at her then, long enough that she felt it in her chest. "What reason's that?" She set the basin aside and dried her hands on her apron. "Because you matter to me, and because I want you whole." He swallowed, then reached for her hand. "I'm not used to being someone's reason." She stepped closer. "Well, get used to it." Outside, a night hawk cried once, and the wind shifted through the grass. Inside, the fire burned steady, and his fingers stayed wrapped around hers. Neither of them moved to let go. By early May, the soil had warmed enough for planting. Willa stood barefoot in the garden plot with her skirts pinned up, her hands caked in black earth. Zeke had turned the soil 2 days before, and now she moved steadily down the row, tucking seed potatoes into the softened ground. A robin trilled from the fence post, and behind her, the barn door creaked as Zeke stepped out carrying a bundle of cedar shingles under one arm. "You're pacing them close," he said, nodding toward her furrow. "I counted proper," she replied without looking up. 6 inches apart, eyes up. "You taught me." He set the shingles down by the cabin wall, then crossed the yard, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. "Didn't expect you to remember every word." "I don't forget what matters." Zeke crouched beside her, his knees creaking. You sure you're not overdoing it? Too late to worry about that, she said, brushing her brow with the back of her hand. I've already planted more than I can eat alone. He pulled a small trowel from his coat pocket and began digging beside her, silent for a moment except for the scrape of metal against soil. Been thinking on building a smokehouse, he said eventually. Wouldn't be much, just enough to cure meat proper. If there's a hard winter again, we ought to be ready. She sat back on her heels. How far ahead do you plan? As far as I can see, he said. Long enough to keep you safe. She watched his profile as he worked, the line of his jaw tight with thought. You're not alone anymore, Zeke. You don't have to carry the whole future yourself. He looked at her then, something unguarded in his expression. I know. Just figuring out how to share it. That afternoon, Willa brought out the ledger and laid it open on the porch step. The pages had begun to fill with inked notes. Planting dates, calf weights, cloth measurements. She flipped to a fresh page and titled it in neat script, Wedding Preparations. Zeke saw it when he came to wash at the pump. He dried his hands, then leaned over her shoulder. You wrote that like you already knew my answer, he said. I did, she replied, without lifting her head. He crouched beside her, resting one hand on the porch rail. You want a church ceremony? There's no preacher within 20 miles, she said. But there's a creek, and a sky, and a man I trust. That's enough. Zeke nodded slowly. You want a ring? I want a life. The rest is just trimmings. He stood and went inside. When he returned, he held something small wrapped in a square of flannel. Willa unfolded it to find a thin silver band, rough-edged but shaped true. Had it made by a man in town, he said. Traded a saddle blanket for it. She slid it onto her finger, the metal cool against her skin. It fits. Of course it does. They married 3 days later, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Zeke wore his cleanest shirt, and Willa wore her mother's locket, the only thing she'd kept from Illinois. They spoke vows soft and plain, words they'd written themselves, and when they kissed, the wind lifted Willa's hair like a blessing. Afterwards, they shared bread and coffee by the fire, just the two of them. No fanfare, no crowd. Only the quiet joy of two people who had come through the worst and found something whole on the other side. As the days lengthened and the garden grew, they settled into a rhythm that felt like breath. Willa sewed curtains for the new room Zeke built, her stitches precise and even. He taught her how to check a saddle's cinch, how to gauge the sky for weather. She taught him how to read by lamplight without squinting, how to laugh at himself when his boots tracked mud across her clean floor. In late summer, she surprised him with a supper of roast chicken. The bird raised and cleaned herself. He stared at the table, then at her. You cooked this without help? You think I can't pluck a chicken? I think I underestimated you. She poured him coffee. You won't make that mistake again. By the time the aspens turned gold, Willa no longer flinched at every cough, no longer feared the tightness in her chest. Her strength had returned in full, not all at once, but steady as the tide. She moved with purpose now, her hands sure, her eyes clear. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Willa took out the quilt she'd been working on. Zeke reached for it, tracing the seams. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. I do, she said. There's a lot of land out back that hasn't been cleared, and I've been thinking about planting apple trees. Maybe some plum. Something that'll outlive us. Zeke leaned back, drawing her close. You think that far ahead? I do, she said again, resting her head on his shoulder. Because I know where I belong now. He kissed her temple, slow and certain. You belong with me. And she did. They spent the first snow watching it fall from the warmth of the porch, 2 mugs steaming in their hands. the sky pale and endless above them. The land slept beneath its blanket, and the cabin stood strong against the wind, its windows lit from within. Inside, their life waited, full of quiet work and long evenings, of laughter that came easy now, of love that had grown from the hard ground of sorrow and taken root deep. They never spoke of what they'd lost before, not because they forgot, but because what they'd built together was stronger than what had come before. And when spring came again, they planted more rows than the year before. They built a cradle out of pine and lined it with wool. They hung new curtains in the back room and opened the windows wide. They never needed a map after that. Home was not a place they followed. It was a place they made.